Hello again, everybody, and welcome back. Today's topic we are talking about the southern portions of Africa. All right, so when we talk about this region, this is the part that we're talking about places like South Africa, Namibia, Botswana, Zimbabwe, Mozambique, Madagascar, places like that. Okay, so when we talk about the southern portions of Africa, we really have to start with that country, South Africa. South Africa is known as the powerhouse economy. It's called this because essentially every other country is going to be reactive, I guess, to what South Africa does. South Africa is the wealthiest, South Africa is the most developed. South Africa is the economy that you have to kind of deal with. Um, if you're Botswana, for example, what you're able to do is going to be a direct reflection of what South Africa does. So you have to have a way of how are we going to relate to, I guess, the South African economy. So they're easily the wealthiest, they're easily the most developed, and their history has an awful lot to do with why they are the way they are. 14% of that country's population is going to be white or European. And this 14% ruled over the country for more than 100 years. Why is 14% able to have such a big impact? Well, you look historically, it makes some sense. They ultimately came to control about two-thirds of the land. Anything of value in the country was going to be owned and operated by that European population. And it all starts with migration, how they came in. First group of Europeans came to South Africa. They were Dutch, German, French settlers. They kind of came in together. They were all people that were dissatisfied with the living under the governments in their home countries. So when they came in, they created a new cultural group known as Afrikaners. Okay, these Afrikaners, because they had modern weapons, because they were the wealthier people. When they came in and experienced the native populations living in South Africa, the natural order of things was that the Afrikaners were going to take the land out around the coast. That is going to be the most valuable land in South Africa. So the Afrikaners take those and kind of force the natives to live further into the interior. The more towards the interior areas of South Africa you go, the more dry it's going to be, the more desert it's going to be, the tougher it's going to be to live on the land. Okay, so fast forward a little bit. Now the British show up. When the British show up, they have even more than what the Afrikaners did. So the British show up, they take the most valuable land out around the coast for themselves, which pushes the Afrikaners further inland, which pushes the natives even further inland. When that happens, they decide, okay, we're going to do something to we've got to do something to try to control this native population, so they create reservations. Exactly the same concept as you see here in the United States with the native population. um, there were reservations that were set up that were specifically just for those groups. Same kind of concept. The land that they're going to get, of course, is going to be the land furthest inland. It's going to be the land that most people are going to see as really just a whole lot of desert, not much else. Okay, so continuing with that, between 1950 and 1980, their economy grew the fastest of anybody in Africa. From that 30-year period is when they're going to kind of establish themselves as that powerhouse economy. And there's four main reasons why that's able to happen. First reason is that when a lot of independence was happening, when countries in Africa were gaining their independence from their European colonizers, in most places, the Europeans are going to leave. It's a concept known as white flight. Happens in a lot of places where essentially the Europeans almost overnight are just going to pick up and leave. In the most places, they're going to leave chaos behind. They're going to leave a situation behind where people aren't ready to rule, aren't ready to handle things themselves. In South Africa, the British decide we're going to leave, but a lot of the European population that was living there actually decided to stay. Now, if you look at their history, we're going to talk here in just a second about apartheid. Europeans sticking around, a lot of people are going to argue that it wasn't a very good thing. And if you want to talk about just laws, absolutely you can make that case. But in terms of economy, the Europeans staying, meaning the Europeans that were owning businesses and were profiting from things that were going on there, meant stability. And stability in a country where every place around you is having chaos is going to lead to better economic conditions. So the Europeans, if you want to just talk purely economics, Europeans sticking around had a positive impact. Second reason, resources. Okay, resources. They are going to have a lot in the way of resources compared to other countries. Specifically, they have two big ones that a lot of the rest of the world wants and is willing to pay big money for. They have gold and diamonds. Those two things are going to make them a lot in the way of economic value. Third is going to be money and connections. Okay, they are going to have, in order to get to those resources, for example, okay, it takes money. You have to have the money to be able to drill and mine these types of things. Um, because the Europeans stuck around, they were going to have money available and connections. The connections that personal connections that a lot of those business people had with places where they could trade resources in other parts of the world. They were going to have those things. A lot of countries that had the Europeans just up and leave were not going to have those same kind of connections, which means they're going to have to figure all that out on their own. So South Africa is going to be able to recover from the end of European colonization a lot easier. And then finally, labor. They are going to have plenty of people who are willing to work. And because of the system that they had set up, they are able to put laws in place that are going to hold wages down. They're going to mean lots of people working for little money, which means lots of money coming into the economy. All right, so jumping back into migration, we said that they set up these reservations. They actually called them homelands, and the homelands were going to be set up so that they were specifically going to move groups around. They were going to try to limit how much contact groups, cultural groups, for example, would have had together because having a lot of communication could potentially mean uprisings. So we they are going to do everything they can to keep them separated to prevent that. They had this system called apartheid. Apartheid was going to be a system of laws that were created specifically to keep Europeans in power and keep the native populations from being able to be seen as equals. Think of segregation in the United States. Think of laws that were specifically to discriminate against one group. That's what apartheid was. That was not just hey, there are certain places that have this. That was the law of the land. That was federal policy. So they have federal laws set up specifically to keep the native population from being on the same level as the European population. A lot of the rest of the world in the 1980s was starting to realize that, hey, you know what? Stuff like this around the world, it's not right. We shouldn't support this. So in 1986, a lot of the countries around the world said, "Hey, South Africa, if you do not make changes to this policy, we won't buy your stuff." South Africa said, "Hey, you can't tell us what to do." So a lot of the rest of the world said, "Ha ha ha, we'll show you." So in 1986, a lot of the countries around the world said, "We're going to place sanctions on you. We are not going to buy your gold and your diamonds." For the most part, the government said, that's okay. We don't need you anyways. Um, and then as time went on, a lot of the business owners who weren't selling their items started going to the government and saying, "Hey, this is a major problem. We're not selling what we used to be selling, and we need you to do something about it." So they're going to start to make changes slowly over time as they start losing money. Understand, they didn't make changes because they felt like it was the right thing to do. They made changes because, hey, we're losing money. And in 1989, a guy by the name of F.W. de Klerk, he was European, he was president of South Africa. Um, he, in 1989, made a decision. He was going to free a person by the name of Nelson Mandela. Now, Nelson Mandela had been a freedom fighter. He was somebody who would organize protests and things like that. He wasn't going to lead an army or anything, but he was trying to make changes to the apartheid policies and was put in jail for essentially being a political activist. All told, he spent 27 years in prison. He never had a trial. He never had charges, brought against him. He was simply held in jail and was a political prisoner. In 1989, FW de Klerk says we're going to allow him to go free. By 1994, um, they're going to hold their first free elections. Nelson Mandela is going to run and is ultimately going to win the presidency. So within 5 years of being let out of prison as a symbolic gesture, he's ultimately going to become president and is going to make big changes. He's going to bring about an end to apartheid for sure. But the one thing that kind of makes him unique is that he's very, very adamant. He does not want to see anyone taking any kind of like retaliation against the European population. He believes everybody needs to live there together. So in 1996, they create a new constitution that mirrors those ideas. All right, next country, Namibia. Namibia, not a whole lot that we can really say about Namibia. They gained independence from South Africa in 1990. They are the driest country in the sub-Saharan Africa. If you were to just do a Google search for Namibia, here's what you're going to find in terms of pictures. You're going to see a whole bunch of sand desert, a whole bunch of sand dunes. That's what a majority of the landscape really is going to be consisting of. So not a whole lot there. They do have some mining operations, diamond, uranium, gold, silver, certainly things that can make them some money. But a very small population, only about 2 million people living here, means that they're going to be one of the least densely populated countries in the world. For the next handful of countries, we're going to pair them up, and we're going to pair them up because they have some things in common. First would be Lesotho and Swaziland. Both are going to be small countries located within South Africa. Lesotho is going to be what's considered an enclave, meaning that it only borders on one other country. It only borders South Africa. The reason that it exists is because there had been a tribe there that had maintained their independence from the British and then decided, okay, we'll become a British protectorate, but we're going to maintain our boundaries. We're going to maintain what we were, and that is Lesotho. Swaziland, on the other hand, does actually border another country other than South Africa. So it's not an enclave, but it actually just changed its name in 2018. It's officially the Kingdom of Eswatini, but you'll still hear Swaziland used. Big thing about them is they've got major, major health issues. Median age there is only about 20 years old. Um, 37% of their population is under the age of 14, and life expectancy is only to age 58. A big reason for that is because they have had a big problem with HIV. About 26% of their population is considered to be HIV positive. Malawi and Botswana. Okay, so we bring these two together, and they're on opposite in opposite areas. Um, because both of them are well, excuse me, let me back up. We talk about these because they're both landlocked. And the reason that these two kind of match is because of their relations with South Africa. They have both decided, hey, we need to have a relationship with South Africa, so let's keep friendly relations. We don't necessarily support apartheid, but we understand that we need them to be able to survive economically. Malawi is going to be a very crowded country. They get a lot of migrant workers because they have very fertile land, they have water, they have a lot of resources, they have a lot of things that you would expect would make a place very wealthy. The reality is they're actually poorer than Botswana. Botswana is a wealthier country, although if you look at them on paper, they're very, it's an arid, not a whole lot of people living there, not many resources. On paper, it does not make sense that they would be the wealthier country. The reality is, Malawi gets a lot of people from other countries that they have to take care of, meaning they spend more money. Botswana has less people, they're less dependent on the government, which means they can be wealthy. Angola and Mozambique, separate coasts, but similar histories, similar approaches. They were both Portuguese colonies. They both gained independence the same way at the same time. They both went through that process of what we call white flight, where the Portuguese were essentially going to leave just pretty much overnight and not prepare people for the realities of taking over. Because of that, they do for a short time try communism. Um, it's not going to last very long. Rebel groups are going to become um, very quickly. They're going to become impatient with seeing the benefits of communism, and rebel groups are going to wind up, rising up and taking over. They do have, somewhat stable economies today, and disease and malnutrition are both problems there. In the 1990s, they both ended South African support once they, gave communism a try. They ultimately decided we can't support what's going on in South Africa. Zambia and Zimbabwe. The thing that pairs them together is that they both really have had some success just trying to kind of avoid the whole South Africa question altogether. That they're not for it, they're not against it, they're just kind of there. They're not going to rule on it one way or the other. Big thing to know about Zambia is that they based their economy around copper, and it was a big, huge, major mistake because in the 80s and 90s, the prices of copper fell. I mean, think about it. What do we use copper for today? Not a whole lot. So if you base your economy around something that's not going to be very valuable, it's going to make it very difficult, especially if agriculture is going to fall right along with it. So Zambia is in very poor condition today. Zimbabwe, previously known as Rhodesia, that was a British name. They gained independence in 1965, and it's not until 1980 that they finally decide, hey, let's have some elections, let's vote on some things, and let's pick a name that's more us. That's where they changed to Zimbabwe. So all the way up till 1980, they were still known as Rhodesia. Now, in the process of those elections in the 80s, they also decided that they were going to go through a process of land redistribution. We've talked about this before, where they take land from people that have a lot of it and give it to people that don't have much. They've seen the same kind of issues with that. While it sounds good, typically the people that didn't have a lot to begin with that now suddenly have this land, for the most part, haven't seen a big return on that. So they've had the same kind of issues that you've seen in other places. Getting towards the end here, Madagascar. A large island out in the Indian Ocean. We are going to consider it to be part of Africa, though. A very narrow coastal plain, plateaus and mountains in the center. A majority of the country is undeveloped jungle. So, yes, that part of Madagascar is going to be like the movie, like the cartoon. Um, there are going to be humans living there. There's not a lot, but there are some. Most of them are going to live on the eastern coast and in that plateau area. That's where most of your agriculture is going to be, and that's ultimately going to employ most of your people. So the eastern part of the island is going to be nothing like the movie. The western part of the island is going to be similar to the movie, and it's been occupied by many countries throughout history, but none have really done much with it. And then our last slide here, just a few islands off the coast that were worth mentioning: Mauritius, Seychelles, and Comoros. Tropical paradises, places where you're going to see a lot of tourism. And that is everything that we would be covering for Africa.